Welcome to Extremely Live. I am Micah Rock and Roll, and I'm here today with William Ibañez, indie comics artist, a comics journal reviewed artist. Pretty exciting stuff. I didn't realize you have a copy of my comic, so that's pretty cool. Because there's a lot of stuff in your comic, Blazing Quantum #1, that I heavily related to. We'll get into that. But,
I appreciate that. Let me show your comic as well.
Heck yeah. Welcome, and thank you so much for doing the show.
Yeah, glad to be here. Yeah, I try to get like a bunch of mini comics from Forbidden Planet anytime I go because they have a good section of indie stuff. So yeah, I have your comic. I've got a bunch of other stuff from there.
Yeah,
it's a good place.
Their indie section is fantastic. It's really, really good. It's like them and Desert Island in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
just reopened. Yeah. I think they're like the only two that I know of, I guess, that like have a pretty involved local and indie section, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But I read your comic. I really, really enjoyed it, and we'll get to that. But what I like to do is I like to just kind of find out how people grew up and where they grew up to kind of get a sense of, what made them and molded them. So I think from your your bio in the back, I believe you grew up in Texas, correct?
Yeah, South Texas.
Yeah, tell me about that.
I was born and raised there. It's on the border, right on the other side of Mexico. So the town was originally one town. It was Laredo, Texas, and then after the Americans annexed Texas, they came to Laredo and they divided the town in half.
Wow.
With the river. So the Rio Grande is like the border officially, and they pretty much told anybody on the northern side of the river was getting annexed and granted American citizenship. Anybody that was on the south side of the rivers belonged to Mexico. So the Mexican side got renamed Nuevo Laredo, which is, you would think like the American side would be called New Laredo because like the original one is just Laredo.
Right.
But yeah, that's, it's just, that's the way history, just tends to happen, and, these names stick. But so I was born and raised there, and then my parents moved there from Puebla, Mexico. And they had settled there pretty much because I think Spanish is still a very dominant language. Like, given that most of the population was Mexican when it was annexed, it's still very spoken Spanish down there. And they were able to kind of thrive locally and open up a pizza shop down there.
Cool.
So it was like an interesting place to grow up in because it's still like tied to a lot of Mexican culture, but like it's very Americanized in some respects. I grew up with McDonald's and Happy Meals, but also listening to Tejano music, and speaking Spanish outside of school. So it was like a very interesting upbringing.
That's great. I feel like a lot of that is in here in this comic of yours. Like the main character works in a restaurant, and you're just bringing back memories from reading this. But that's great. So I also appreciate that you seem to enjoy history, or at least have a knowledge of history. There's a segment in this book where we have like this historical interlude of all the happenings throughout the years in the area that the characters live, and it's really, really cool. I love the art of that whole section, and just it was a fun like excursion away from what you were doing, and then you bring it back. I just really, really enjoyed that, and I thought it was a very cool, interesting thing to do. It felt like I don't know, like remind me of like a Wes Anderson kind of like tangent almost from like one of his movies.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, it feels like
I think I wrote that. I still hadn't seen many of his movies because I'm not gonna lie, like I'm pretty late into a lot of the art films. Like I didn't start watching a lot of art films until probably college or later. I was just such a comics nerd. I wasn't aware of directors like oh my god, the guy who just passed away, he did Eraserhead.
Oh yeah, David Lynch. Yeah.
Yes, David. Like I didn't know anything about David Lynch films, so like a lot of I appreciate the analogy there because yeah, I didn't grow up watching too many art films. Like
Well,
I
this
was
is
a total comics nerd. Like
this is
that's all I knew. And
yeah.
then mainstream pop movies, that were like just the top 5 movies of the '90s.
Right. That's great. Yeah, let's dig into that because I am always curious. I think, your teenage years are, for whatever reason, that kind of time of your life when the media and the things you're ingesting kind of really sit in your brain a lot heavier than a lot of other things for some reason. And I feel like a lot of people's influences kind of come from that time, that ultimately shape their own style or their own interests of what they want to make. So I'm always curious what, in your teenage years, what you were consuming. It sounds like a lot of comics, but let's drill down on
Oh
what you
man.
were taking in.
So my dad's pizza shop, he he was just selling pizzas there, and like he had a huge like warehouse for like a lot of the like supplies, and like a couple of kids just asked him if they could start playing like local shows there because
Oh, that's great.
there's no venue for music in my hometown at the time that like
Mm.
catered to the rock and roll stuff. My dad not knowing any like English or like knowing any American music whatsoever was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like I'll let you. We split the door, and you guys bring me customers.
That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
I grew up around that, and as a kid, and like I remember a lot of the punk rock, like heavy metal people would bring in magazines and comics. So they were bringing comics like from heavy metal, the heavy metal magazine.
Yep.
They were bringing that kind of stuff. They were bringing in stuff like a lot of the Spawn.
Mm.
Spawn was very big with like heavy metal kids for some
Yeah.
reason. Like, they were bringing a lot of that stuff in. So I kind of was exposed kind of halfway, in a comics that way.
Mm.
And then you end up like, oh, there's a comic shop. Like, let me go check. I want to buy more of this stuff. And, I got exposed to like the Marvel stuff there. But I got into it when Image was riding high on their like, grim and gritty post Dark Knight stuff. So like, that's kind of how I got into it. And my dad was like, well, I don't know what this is. I just know the like heavy metal kids are into it. And sure, if you're going to read it, that's so long as you're reading, right? You're learning English and reading in English. That's all that matters. Like I'll buy your stuff. So they're very supportive with that. So I did grow up a lot of my time going to the pizza shop on the weekends when they would have shows. And I was in 8th grade too. So I was still a little kid, but
Mm.
I would draw in the food area, the dining area, and like I'd have my sketchbook and like with my comics, and like after the shows in between sets, like heavy metal kids would come out and look at my sketchbook and like, what do you got drawing there? So it's kind of like I got into comics and punk and heavy metal kind of like, to me they overlap. Like they're both major influences in my life, and like they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Like they're artistic expressions, right? And they're not considered highbrow art or highbrow music. So to me they're like they overlap, and it's kind of it goes against like the mainstream,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think comics are anti like high art, like they're not mainstream, but then in comics there is a mainstream and an indie and
Yeah.
right. So that's pretty funny. And like so as I got into comics that way, like I started researching a lot. I would go to the library, and there was like a lot of books on comics history, and it was the books on comics history that introduced me to Robert Crumb, and and then from there you find out Daniel Klaus, and then from there like the Hernandez brothers. So it all started because of my dad's pizza shop, like
That's
kind of
great.
overlapping. So
Uh, as someone who's been hosting a video show out of a wood shop for 2 years, I love the whole kind of non-venue venue, just taking cash at the door kind of a show. Like I love that energy. That's great. Um, I want to share this with you because I feel like you would like it. I don't know if you ever read this. This is Ken Lengraff's.
I have some of the single issues, but I don't
Yeah,
have that particular one. He's amazing,
dude, it's
amazing.
so cool. I just got this because of Jim Rugg just made like a zine of some unpublished works by him, and I feel like I had heard of him back in the day, but I just totally forgot about him. I probably through Cartoonist Kayfabe. I feel like they at least talked about him on there, if not interviewed him. But I grabbed this after that zine, and it's the same thing you're talking about, that meshing of like down and dirty art and then like the rock scene. Like everybody in here is dressed like a punk rocker, and there is this kind of cool, you have to make yourself cool because you're probably a nerd. Like I feel like that's you know what I mean, like that. I bet is true of music. What's that?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I've always told people I feel like punk rockers are kids that used to be nerds in middle school,
totally.
And then to kind of tough up for whatever bullying might come, you turn into a punk rocker. So it's like peacocking. You look intimidating, so nobody messes with you.
Exactly. Right? So, yeah. I think there's some kindred spirit there with the comic book people. You know what I mean? Like drawing
I think this is funny, or like not funny, but just kind of like self-deprecating. Like I know for a fact that a lot of the punks that went to these shows were still playing Dungeons and Dragons. They go to Fridays, you go to a rock show, and then like Saturdays, it's like, guys, we're getting ready for like a campaign D&D. You guys want to join? It's like, keep it up. I'm like, what? Like you guys are so tough. Like you'd be the last I would think of like being into Dungeons and Dragons, but. It's just there's that overlap, man. It's that overlap. So it's definitely interesting. I think all this, like the Dungeons and Dragons, punk rock, like Magic the Gathering, to me it all overlaps. It's like anti-establishment, it's lowbrow, but it's still in your face. And that's the thing too, right? Dungeons and Dragons at one point had the Satanic Panic, right?
Oh yeah.
So even then, even if you were a nerd playing that, like you were still lumped together with the heavy metal music.
Yep.
Right. And it's like, you just got to stick together, I guess.
Yeah.
Against the 80s and 90s overreaction of the time.
Yeah. I went through that pretty directly in a dark way. Just my family was very like Pentecostal Christian religious. And that whole thing just swept through that whole community of like anything and everything was evil and needed to be, ripped out of your home. And my older brothers and my father, I remember had as a little kid remembering them playing D&D at the dinner table, and then they just stopped because of all of that. And I have a very now to me it's funny, but it's a very dark tale of I guess a book came out that was written by Focus on the Family, which was like a big Christian radio station conglomerate type deal, and they said Ninja Turtles were evil. Like satanic.
I remember that.
And my mom rounded up all my Ninja Turtles and burned them in a bonfire. Oh like that's the level of like serious people were taking this back.
Yeah. No, that's traumatizing. I liked your story in Orange Flavor. Because you mentioned about like, the like how religious it was, and that they were you guys were getting the donated clothes, and that the story ends with the Jesus Loves You t-shirt that like the rich kid didn't want. So you guys got it. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm like, but like, that's the thing. Like, so yeah, growing up in South Texas, there was a lot of conservative, like, evangelical Christians as well as Catholicism. So like there, I did see a lot of that where like they preach about being like almighty and everything. And then like, oh, we're going to donate the clothes nobody likes, like not the good clothes, the bad clothes, right? The taggy clothes. So yeah, it's totally that, man. But you try your best to navigate it. I was very fortunate that my parents, as religious as they were very understanding of my pursuit of art. But I think part of that is also because they didn't speak English, so they weren't like sitting there reading to see if it was appropriate or not. They're like, well, you're reading for school, whatever, it's fine.
Yeah, that's great.
So I guess I did work out in that part. But it's Texas is still very, still got it's religious areas, and every
Yeah.
time my folks, I if they want me to go to church, I'll go. I won't. I'll be respectful and mindful.
Yeah, totally.
You know.
I'm curious, were you drawing before you got into comics, or was comics the thing that? Yeah.
No, I was, and I loved watching cartoons as a kid. Like, I'm a Transformers, Ninja Turtles, Thundercats kid, and I was like, I want to do that for a living.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get into animation. And then as I got older, I'm like, wait a minute, you got to draw like one scene takes a couple of months. Like, you got to draw like 30 to 40 pages for 2 seconds. I'm like, that seems boring. I'm like, I don't. I'm like, one punch, it takes like 30 drawings. I'm like, I can't draw 30 pages in like one day. I'm like, that's boring. So I was like, oh, comics is like, you can pretty much do it by yourself. You don't need a team of animators.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember trying to get my brother to draw with me. I have a younger brother who's like a year apart, and I remember trying to get him to draw with me. Like, me thinking in my head, like, we're gonna have an animation team. Like, let's draw together. It's like, no, man. These like animation studios, like, I have like 80 people at least. Like, so yeah. Comics, I got into it, and then like you research that, and it's like all it takes is like one person, maybe 3 inker, colorists, letterer, 4. And like I started making mini comics probably around 6th grade. No, 6th, like, yeah, no, 8th grade, somewhere around there. Like, I just remember having a comic fall apart and like the staples falling off the spine, and I'm like, oh, this is like, these are spreads, this is how you have to fold it. I'm like, well, I can do this. And then it's like, you just get your mom's stapler and like staple a couple of sheets and then just draw my own stories, and then like just show them off to people at school, and that's kind of what kind of pushed me towards that direction, because and they were comics that were like, I was just making stick figures, like funny stories, and like getting people to laugh at that was like, all right, man, I can do this, people are liking it. And I had one copy, I remember this, I lent it to one of my friends, and they ended up losing it. And I think like 3 days later, some kid came up to me in the hallways, was like, hey man, you gotta check this out, it's funny. It was like all toilet humor too. It was like middle school toilet humor, like probably my bad attempt at Beavis and Butthead. But like, they handed it back to me and they're like, this is hilarious. It was like all wrinkled, like pages that were tearing, but they're like, I don't know how many hands I had been through. And I'm like, this is mine. I'm like, can I take it back? Like, well, I have to give it back to the person who lent it to me. I'm like, where'd you get it from? I'm like, this is mine. I'm like, give it back to me. But I was like, awesome. Oh my God, like the whole, like half the school must have read this. I'm like, I was like, even though it was like torn and everything, I was like, yeah, man, I can do this. This is fun. I want to pursue this as a living or a career. So yeah, that's kind of what, like, did it for me, is like, I'm going to pursue it.
That's great. I love that you got a genuine compliment. He didn't even know you were the one who made it, and he's just like, you got to check this out. That's a great story.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I like to kind of dig into that. There's always just something interesting from that era in people's lives, like I like to start there. But hello, I'm Micah, creator of Extremely Live. If you're enjoying what you're watching, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend. Please, that would be amazing. Extremely Live is a podcast and a live stream that is value for value. If you're getting value out of what we're making, we ask that you send us some value in return by going to extremely.live/donate. We'll take anything. We appreciate everything. And with that, let's get back to the video. Let's start talking about Blazing Quantum specifically. Was this your first like serious comic, or when did your first like like, I'm charging money for this, I believe in this, this is my first thing? Like, when did that come about?
I think by college I was trying to kind of quote unquote break in, because in art school they were there were two clubs. There's one called Ink Stains. There's one called Cartoon Allies, and the school was sponsoring the club to like pay for tables at SPX.
Oh, cool.
And I got a table at one show with a couple of like classmates, and I was like, "This is it. I'm gonna sell my comic, and I'm gonna really try my best at this." And I remember working like for a whole semester on the story, and I just sold one copy at the show, and I was like, man, I felt so disheartened because like I remember Alex Robinson was there who did Box Office Poison.
Okay,
yeah. And I'm tabling at a show with professionals. I'm like, people are here to buy comics. I'm gonna sell like all my print run. And I went to Staples and like hand stapled them. And like I must have done like 50 copies, and like I went. We got in the bus to Maryland because it's still in Maryland. But yeah, me and a couple of students got on the bus to Maryland, and like I had my box of comics, and like I'm like looking forward to it, and yeah, no, I sold one copy, and I was just so disheartened. And like the only highlight of the show was like, well, I might as well go try to talk to all these creators, show them my portfolio and like my samples and my mini comic. But Alex Robinson's the one I remember the most, just being like, no man, that's amazing, like, you know, like you're not gonna you gotta fail first before you make it big. Like you're not gonna sell out of the first comic you make. Like no one comes out of like school like a professional. Like it takes trial and error. And I told him I read your comics in 8th grade, and he's like, what? He's like, I'm not that old. And so I bought one of his comics and he signed it. One day someone's gonna tell you they read your comics in 8th grade. And I was like, that's awesome. I got to meet Alex Robinson. And I knew who he was because he got a shout out in Wizard. And Wizard back then used to have, or the early Wizards, they used to have like the column dedicated to like independent comics.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I knew Alex Robinson. So like I'm like, I have to go talk to him. So that was the only highlight of the show. I was super sad, and then like Alex Robinson like kind of lifted my spirits. So when I went back home, I was like, this isn't the end of the world. Like you gotta take your rejection, man. So Blazing Quantum was kind of my after like college, like this is gonna be my first issue book, and I made it 2006. I graduated 2005, so I made it around 2006, and I tried shopping it to Diamond. I tried to get a couple of my art professors to give me blurbs, and like nobody was biting.
Damn.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing. And like I had a whole proposal for Diamond, and like they rejected it. And like I had it professionally printed. I had it in color too. And it just didn't happen. And I was like, well, you know, I got to try something else or try to find another career. So I went back to school for graphic design, and you know, just I ended up getting a job in that field. And when my ex got pregnant, I was going through my old stuff, my old art school drawings, and I'm like, this doesn't look bad. I'm like, I came across it. I'm like, Blazing Quantum doesn't look bad. I'm like, I don't know, man. And like she was pregnant, and like I was like, man, if I don't submit to this to more people or like try again and just maybe re-letter it somehow, like I'm gonna regret it. Like it's either now or never. So I sent it out to the Comics Alternative, which rest in peace. They were around for a few years, but I think one of the hosts passed away not too long ago. But they reviewed mostly like graphic novels and like and it was not superhero stuff. And like I sent them the I made it into a mini comic, black and white. I took out the color. I sent it to them on a whim, and I was like, if they so much as look at it, then I'll try again. And like a couple of months went by, and they gave me like a good 2-hour review on the show.
That's awesome.
They broke it down and everything, and I was like, that's it. I'm doing this. I'm like, maybe like Diamond, because Diamond at the time, like, you know, we all know they used to be a monopoly, right? Like, and they're going through bankruptcy now, but back then, like, if you wanted to get into comic shops as an independent creator, like that was the end all be all. Like Diamond had the final say, and if they said no, your only other option was to table at shows, right? And even then, like if you're not a well-known name, like some of these shows, like they had a lottery or it's curated, and
Yeah.
if you're not named like Daniel Klaus or Scott McCloud, like it's very hard, So when they got on the show, when I got reviewed on that show, it was kind of like doors opened, and it kind of put me on the right track. Like, you got to keep doing this, you got to keep doing this. So I made issue 2, then 3. But it took a while, man. Like, yeah, I was 2006 when I made Blazing Quantum, and I would say only in the last like 5 or 6 years has it been getting like reviewed and attention. And like I've been going to shows. I've been to SPX 3 years in a row. I just did a book fair like 2 weeks ago, and it feels really good, man. Like that people are recognizing it, because yeah, it's been a struggle. Like it sat on the shelf for a while.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, I'm only just getting started in the past few years of taking the comics thing more seriously, and it wouldn't shock me if most people in comics have a day job. You know what I mean? It's like even the professionals. I feel like I'm sure like have teach a class or something along those lines, just because it's hard to make a hit, and especially in the world of comics, which I would imagine is pretty small compared to other art forms like film, although even film is like shrinking now, like
because it's all mainstream stuff. Like you can't see a good indie film in a theater anymore. Like I know during college, when I was like getting exposed, like I said, to a lot of the independent films, like I know we had Film Forum and a couple of those theaters, but like you don't see as much as the smaller films making it to like the big theaters. Like they have to compete with all the like genre superhero stuff that I'm already tired of.
Yeah.
I don't know if a movie like Fight Club would get made today, or like, cause that's like my, like, that's where I'm going by. Like Fight Club wasn't the genre movie, it was based on a book. Right. And like that, and some people might find that movie problematic, but like when it came out for me and like my friends, I'm like, wow, this is like it's an eye-opening like film, right?
I started a Fight Club as a 16-year-old because of it.
Wow.
Do what you don't do. You get broken teeth real fast.
Yeah. But I mean, like that whole book was a critique on capitalism, right? Like the failures of capitalism and like just commercialism. And for that film to come out in a mainstream like release, like, was pretty amazing. Like, especially if like you're a teenager, and like it does make an impression. And I feel like those types of movies you're not going to see anymore, which is unfortunate.
They're definitely far and few between. I know a guy here in New York who just sold a comedy to Hulu. So it's still possible, but it's like it's absolutely less common to see somebody's like independently made small movie. Like it's just rarer and rarer for whatever reason. It doesn't make any sense to me, really. Like, why do all movies have to have a budget of $200 million in order to get into a theater? It's just, I don't understand why that is. Like, why can't you,
I feel like it's affected all art forms. Like, trying to go back to comics, right? But I think technology really changed how, whether it's comics, film, or music, the way like society interacts or consumes media has completely changed. And like, I think as a result, we're getting smaller returns as artists, regardless of what medium you're in. I think it's unfortunate because, you used to think like, oh, well, even if you don't like, not all art forms are going to give you money, but if you make it in Hollywood, you'll probably get some money. Right. And like, that's not true anymore. Like,
I know.
Like,
it's insane.
Writers are not getting paid like what they used to. Right. And it's like, wow, man, if like Hollywood's struggling, I can't imagine how harder it's going to be for cartoonists. Or like, Yeah, streamers. It's crazy. But I think social media did change how we interact with art a lot,
Yeah.
and like I think we're having to adapt to that. And like I don't know if it's gonna get better, but I think we're in that like stage in our technology, our relationship with technology, where we're figuring it out. Like
Mm.
how can we still? How can this be sustainable? Um, I don't know. I know musicians like how many cents do they get per Spotify song? Like it's you
Yeah.
know.
Not much. I mean, just the fact that A-level celebrities all do commercials now. Like my wife is an actor and goes out for commercials all the time, and she'll do. I'll hear her reciting lines in here, and then 6 months later, some woman from SNL is saying them in the real commercial, and I'm like, and not even just SNL, like hot, like Julia Roberts, like doing
Oh
like a
wow.
coffee commercial or something, like it's because they're not making as much money as they used to, and they like, you know what I mean? They have to keep up that lifestyle that they're accustomed to from the 90s or whatever. And so now they all do commercials, and now regular people, it's even harder to just book a commercial as an
Yeah.
actor because, if Brad Pitt's willing to do a commercial, you're going to hire Brad Pitt to do it.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. I do think a lot about the distribution side of things, like how that there's got to be more people out there interested in independent stuff than can find it. You know what I mean? Like
I
you
agree.
as a little kid were discovering all this cool stuff because it was physically in front of you, and like you had like these, you had like the big brother character of the metalhead kids showing you like heavy metal and comic books and stuff. I had my older brothers showing me cool stuff, and my grandfather actually was a big comic guy and showed me a lot of very cool comics. Like we need that like voice or the distribution system where people can find the cool stuff, and it just I don't know. I I just am not sold that it's social media, like I think that it could be if they would show you the stuff that you told them you wanted to see rather
But
than,
yeah,
you know
but
what I
that's the
mean?
thing. I feel like everything's so like catered to a specific audience now. Like you can't. That's the thing with social media. You can't randomly bump into a Daniel Clowes post or a
Yeah.
Robert Crumb post if you're not already looking for that, right?
Yeah.
Like I know, like you used to be able to go to a comic shop and like you could randomly pick something off like an Hernandez Brothers comic and like, oh, that's cool, like what is this? You pick it up out of curiosity, right? And then like
Yeah.
it blows your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's I'm glad about for the comic shops we have up here because they do tend to like diversify their product. But if you go to like smaller towns, they
It's
can't
just horrible.
afford they can't afford to order that much product because their populations are smaller, right? So the smaller towns have like smaller populations, so like they can't order as like many diverse things, and so the stores like in Texas where I used to shop at it tended to be mostly Marvel and DC. And if you wanted something like a Love and Rockets comic or Daniel Klaus, you'd have to drive 3 hours to like the metropolitan city,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I I, I think I don't know what's going to happen with the Diamond bankruptcy. I know they dropped like the people that are suffering the most are like the smaller publishers, the independent publishers, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think comic shops are probably going to have to run themselves the way bookstores do, right? And bookstores, everything they can order and it's still returnable. And I think that's kind of what did it for comic shops or for the comic book industry, right? That you buy everything like and you have 30 days to pay it back. It's not returnable. And I think that was a good business for publishers and like even for independent publishers. It worked for a while, but I think, that was kind of the nail that like kind of, hit the coffin. It was just that it was that model that like it wasn't sustainable. Um, so I think if comic shops are going to survive and like still be able to carry diverse product, they need to kind of re restructure themselves the way bookstores do. I
Hmm.
think, but who knows? I don't know. I'm like, it's just something I was thinking about because
Yeah.
going back to mini comics and how do we get it in front of stores? Like, yeah, I had submitted to Diamond, and then I thought about like, well, if Diamond's not going to take it, the only other places are bookstores. But bookstores, you need to have it collected as a graphic novel, right? And it's like I don't have enough pages done for that. And do they carry periodicals? And like, well, yeah, they carry periodicals, but that's a different barcode because it's I researched all this back then, and I'm like, it's just trying to find a way that's like sustainable and still be able to be profitable. And
Yeah.
I like what you said earlier, like a lot of cartoonists do have day jobs. So, yeah,
Yeah.
these it's something that keeps me up at night, like for sure, and I'm very fortunate that I've been getting the press I've been getting the past 5 years, but it's not to the point where I'm like, oh, I can quit my day job.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. I don't know where people are looking for things anymore, like even if you follow, like someone follows you on Instagram, there's like a huge chance that they'll never even see anything you post because the algorithm just shows you other random crap too. So it's like, I don't know. I think the algorithms are the enemy of the small creator for sure. Like they're kind of hiding what you're making. So it's like, how do you build your audience and get in front of them consistently? It's a big issue, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know, like you're saying, even like on a comic book shop level, like, yeah, we're gonna have to start experimenting and changing things and trying things, and I don't know what that looks like, but I mean, I keep telling myself I'm gonna do this, and I haven't yet, and I really should, but I'm straight up, like, just kind of for fun and experiment, want to go down into the New York City subway and just literally just hawk comic books. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's on mine too, like Robert Crumb style when he was selling his comic out of the baby carriage on San Francisco.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you gotta have to push it. There's a grocery store across from my house, and I had them carrying my comic for nice. And it was awesome. Like, it felt great. Like, I'm like, there are things you can do, and like, you just have to kind of think outside of the norm, and like, what kind of a store would be interested in having a comic book for sale that isn't necessarily a comic shop. Like that, I think, is a good thing for people to think about for their, like, anywhere you live. Like, someone will be charmed by the idea and be willing to. Often what I was doing is like, you don't have to pay for them. You can just hold them, and then if you sell, I'll check back, in a couple weeks, and if you sell, we'll split the profit. Like that gets you in the door at the very least. But yeah, there's a lot of creative thinking has to be done, I think. Unfortunately, it's not just the fun of making stuff. Like, if you want to actually get in front of people, you got to think, I guess, like a business person, which is not my greatest skill, but I
don't think comics are going to go away. I mean, I definitely do agree that, like, people are craving this stuff. They just don't know it's out there. Right. So
totally.
I think book fairs and comic festival, like zine festivals, like those, I've been fortunate to already be in some of those, and like, it's, people respond. So there's that. But like, yeah, I mean, like, how like, and that's the thing too, right? Like, yes, festivals are awesome, but like, you can't be touring the whole country and then like expect that to be like profitable, because you got to pay for gas and food and like, all that stuff. But yeah, that I did think about. I'm like, well, what if I tour like a rock band? Like, just get a band and we do every show from like the East to the West Coast for one summer, like table at every show and just drive and tour. But it's like, you got to pay for gas, and like, what about hotels? And like, so like the costs do add up. But I was like, I could just tour it like a punk rock band.
I mean,
like,
that sounds fun just to do. You know what I mean? Like, if the goal wasn't making money, like that just sounds like a fun sounds like a fun thing
Yeah.
to do. You know, like get a one of those van life vans and sleep in your van.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you this first issue is 64 pages. That to me is extremely impressive as someone who's I think thus far I think I've topped out at 10 pages for a story. I do an anthology, so I just do a bunch of smaller things and put it all together. But I am kind of building up to, you know, longer and longer stories, and I want to get to like sort of a Japanese manga one shot length. I think that would be a fun
Nice.
goal. But yeah, I guess this is like, I would say it's almost a graphic novel in a single issue. Like what just why did you decide to make something so long? But like that to me is interesting. Like rather than do like a 24 page thing over a period of time, like you put a lot into this thing.
Well, yeah, but they were designed as like 8-page vignettes,
Okay.
and I decided to like tie them together. Like, there's a thread that ties all the vignettes together, right? Because they're like, I think they're 8-page increments.
Okay. Let me look.
And the reason I designed them that way is because I was thinking of the Two Fisted Tales and the EC comic
Yep.
format, like 8-page stories that like you can take a break at and then pick up again later, and it's
That's
another
cool.
artist, another story. And like I kind of designed it that way because I really liked Harvey Kurtzman's like take on things, right? Like it was easily digestible. And my thinking was like, well, I want to create this like huge thread with history and like the like biography of the hometown. Like I don't call it autobiocomics, I call them a metabiography because it's not just me, it's like the history of the town. So I was trying to kind of find a way to like weave all that together, and I was like, well, Harvey Kurtzman like had like he had his comics that like were like anthologies, right? But like they still had a theme. It was like they were either war related, Two Fisted Tales, or horror, like the EC comics, or humor, the Mad before it was a magazine, and they were all 8-page stories. But like the theme was the same. So I'm like, okay, like the thing for me is that like it's like history, but it also like affects like the teenagers that were growing up there. Like, so I figured the format from Harvey Kurtzman would work great. And I'm like, let's just see how many stories I can get together and see how long this thread can weave through these 8-page like shorts. And it came out to 64 pages. And it just, I don't want to say I planned it. I feel like it just kind of fell in place like a happy accident, you know? But it was definitely me thinking in Harvey Kurtzman terms. And I'm like, okay, the theme of the book, okay, it's not Two Fisted Tales, it's not hard, but it's a biography, but it's not my biography. So that's the thing. It's biography. But of what? And it's like me, but history and like Texas, and it's like, okay, that's biography is the theme. Let's tie all those things together. 8-page vignettes, and it came out to 64 pages.
That's great.
But yeah, I'm glad you kind of pick up on some of those things, because it's yeah, you don't know if it's gonna be successful when you're planning this out. You know, you're just kind of like, I don't know if it was just me being naive or just overly ambitious, not knowing any better. But it's just, you know, like, all right, let's go for it and see how it comes along. What made it easy for me was thumbnailing everything in 8-page increments. And like, you know, I didn't have the whole 64 pages planned out. It was 8-page thumbnails, draw 8 pages, ink 8 pages, thumbnail another 8, and like see if the pieces fit. And yeah, it did take a while though. It wasn't like a year. I think it took about a year and a half or two to get all that together.
Yeah. It's a lot of work. That's smart of like doing it in those increments. And yeah, it would be overwhelming if you were like, I'm going to do a 64 page epic, you know what I mean? And like just start from one and plan out every page to 64.
That
Like,
is insane to me. And you know what? When I've tabled at shows, sometimes I do talk to professionals. Um, and like I know Joe Flood, who's done stuff for Scholastic. Like I was talking to him about how he works, and he's like, "Man, if you're doing a graphic novel for these big publishers, they don't even want you penciling or inking a page, like before they see the whole thing thumbnailed out."
whoa.
I do not know if I can do like 200 pages worth of thumbnails to get an approval to start inking or penciling.
Yeah, that's
I'm like,
brutal.
I'm ready to start drawing, and if I have to pitch something and I have to show thumbnails first, like 100 or 150 pages worth of thumbnails is just, I get bored. Like I don't,
Yeah.
and my
Yeah.
thumbnails are stick figures, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have like a set like order of way I do things. Like the ideas come to me in different ways. So it's like sometimes I'll start drawing first, or sometimes I'll start writing, on the computer first, or I'll draw without knowing what the dialogue is yet, and then figure it out later.
Yeah. So I'm the same way. It's just kind of like, and I think because we're cartoonists, we like tend to think. We don't think with the script, and we don't necessarily think with drawings. We just, we think sequentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a different way of thinking than like writing a script or writing a book. And it's a different way of thinking from observational drawing, or like doing like the structure of the human form. Like, it's just because it's such a different way. And it's like, I've tried to tell the like people who are illustrators, like, well, how do you plan a page? Like, do you like get the anatomy? And like, no, man, it's like, that's like, no, like there's like, I'm thinking about like maybe film, if anything.
Yeah,
I don't know.
me too, actually. Like the way I think of them is, at least for the issue I'm working on right now, is they feel like short films to me, and they're like the scenes kind of operate as scenes in a short film. Like it has a very much a flow like that, which I know some people are like, that's lame. Like comics can be their own thing, and like, you know what I mean? Like there's definitely that energy out there, which I respect. I do. I do get that, and but for whatever reason, it's been coming to me as like scenes in a film, and it's like these are like the key frames of these scenes.
I think people don't realize timing is just as important for film as it is for comics.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, because like you got to know when to hold a pause, or when to like zoom in on a character's face, and just kind of like pause for the like somber moments, like, and those are two things that are important for both mediums, like just timing.
Yeah.
So you can get the laugh, or you can get like the tears from like your audience, like. Yeah, it's a different way of thinking. I think like cartoonists like tend to be like a different breed of artists that like I don't think are as understood as much. I don't know. I'm not saying cartoonists are like highbrow, but I think like we tend to be like I don't know, like our way of processing thought and like thinking and imagery is completely different than like your average, not average. I shouldn't say average. I'm not talking bad about film and authors or writers, but it's just a different way. It's just, and I think people get frustrated sometimes with like our process, and, and sometimes I bring that type of thinking to my job too, like to my graphic design job. And I'm like thinking different ways than from how my coworkers are, or processing information differently. You get your design brief for your like your art instructions from your art director, and like I'm like processing things differently from my coworkers, and it's just we're a different breed. It's
You talking about timing, you just made me remember how much I appreciate the sort of the Japanese manga style of like they'll have these frames of just like leaves falling or something, or these panels, you know what I mean? Like these breathing moments. was it Osamu Tezuka, or is it? I always say his name wrong. Yeah,
Yeah, no, yeah,
Osamu
Tezuka,
Tezuka. I love Dororo. I don't know if you've ever read that, but
No.
it's a good one. It's worth checking out for sure. But like it has these nice moments where they make the point they're trying to make, and we see something that's just like scenery or like a close up of something, and then we move on to the next moment. Yeah, you just made me think of that. Not that it
Yeah,
has
no,
any
there's a lot of great timing in there.
for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of techniques and how we do things, I just want to compliment you on your spotting of blacks, as they call it, where you're filling in shadow in these beautiful huge swaths of black. I'm assuming you took some inspiration from the Hernandez brothers, because I see them as kind of like the kings of that. You know what I mean? Like I'm pretty blown away by the Hernandez brothers, to be honest. I haven't read enough of their stuff, but just because I would love to get like Love and Rockets in sequential order, like as either the just like a single issues, but it's so expensive. So I started grabbing those these things, the compilations.
Yeah, those are great.
Yeah, and they are good. But yeah, it reminded me of that, of like,
oh, thank you.
I
don't think I'm nowhere near that, but I appreciate it.
None of us are, but yeah, I don't know. Like you've got a lot of like heavy, black on the page, and it's a skill I do not have, and I'm trying to work on it, and I just really appreciate that. And I'm curious, like, when do you see, like, at what point are you seeing that and knowing it's going to be like a harsh, super harsh shadow? Like, are you kind of experimenting after the fact and finding it, or are you nailing it down? Do you have to nail it down first before you know how the rest of your composition is going to look? Like, just tell me a little bit about.
I usually my pencils are very light. I don't think about light and shade during the pencils. My pencils are just like the outlines of the characters and the backgrounds, and then I figure out all the shadow in the inking stage. I'm not gonna lie, man. It's like a lot of push and pull. Mm-hmm. Like, well, if I put a black here, then that means I can't put a black in front. So, like, I kind of have to be like, okay, well, if the black's there, then that means the shirt, even if the character shirt's black, I have to kind of leave some white and to kind of balance it out, right? So it's like a push and pull. It's like making stuff pop, right? And if it's a character by himself and like he looks very empty, then like, all right, just black out the background, or like add shapes or forms that go black to fill in. Like an inker that I really looked at a lot was Wally Wood.
Oh, okay.
I think he's probably the master of inking, and like I think the comic books look the way they do today because of his like light and shading. I always tell people they should check Wally Wood out. And I'm not gonna lie, like sometimes like I can't figure it out. Like I will have a Wally Wood comic next to me as I'm inking, and it's like, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes I'll be like, I can't figure this out, and like I want to make this character pop, but like he's in front of a window, and then like I'll pull up the Wally Wood book or comics. I have his 22 panels that always work somewhere up here.
Oh, that's a good. I'm writing that down. I've heard of that, and I never thought to grab a copy.
But yeah, his 22 panels that always work, and if you get any of his black and white comics, it's just any of that stuff like really helps. Even if you have it on the side while you're like drawing.
That's cool.
It's something
That's a good tip.
Yeah.
I just grabbed it's like the best of the EC stories artist edition or whatever. And I'm pretty sure there's some Wally Wood in there. I would imagine there is.
Yeah. Those are good. So wait, you have the big one, the 11 by 17 ones?
It's not quite that. It's like somewhere in between. But cool. It's the pictures of the actual boards. Like,
yeah.
So I'm excited
Awesome.
I haven't cracked that open yet. I'm excited to go in there. Yeah, man. It just always looks so good to me when there's just like those super, just tons of like super dark shadows. I love that look. And I'm always gun shy to like do it on the page. I've been experimenting in Photoshop after the fact. I'll like do black fills and see how it looks and kind of play around. But my default is always to like hash, or if something feels like too plain, I'll just start like stippling a little bit here
Oh
and
yeah.
there to like just fill in some detail,
Yeah.
which I still like, but like I definitely want to incorporate more of that. Yeah, like I said, just like that super stark. I love the stark contrast. It just looks
Yeah.
awesome, and I rarely do it, so I'm gonna push myself to do more of that. And I will take your advice. I'll have a
Yeah, man.
Wally.
Wally looks really
I'll
good.
have some Wally Wood out as I do it. That's good.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see what else. We're getting to the hour mark. I usually wrap up around there, but let's see what else I've written down here. Oh, I do want to compliment you on. I was looking at your what is it called? Here it is. Codex of the Jaguar. I was like flipping through the images online, and those character designs are awesome, dude. Like they
Thanks.
look great. It's so cool. Grab a copy of that for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, like the whole look of the characters is just awesome. I wrote down some themes and things that stood out to me in Blazing Quantum. One of them was violent adults just getting swatted all the time or spanked.
Yeah.
Or yeah, it's a different time, folks, but I had a
Well, I
similar
mean,
experience.
but yeah, it's that conservative Catholicism. In my case, like the conservative Catholicism upbringing, right? Like, and I'm sure it comes from like it just comes from years of like colonialism and like the Spaniards bringing in like this very strict moral Catholic code, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's just like habits that get passed down. But I mean, that goes as far back as the nuns hitting people with the ruler, and
Yeah.
yeah,
We're
it's just stuff that I grew up around. But like, you know what? Like now that I'm older, like me and my brother will like kind of laugh about it because it's like, you remember that time you really like pissed off mom and like she lost her shit, and it's like, oh my god, you were crazy for like thinking that. Like, we laugh about it, but like, it's like, yeah, you can't, like it's definitely something that is problematic, right? You shouldn't be. I don't advocate that you raise your kids that way, but it's just like I think for us, like I guess people in my generation, or at least people in my generation that are from my background, like we tend to use humor to kind of overcome like I don't want to call it trauma, but like we use humor now to kind of overcome and like
it soothes things. Like
like
anytime I'm in a situation where it feels like there's conflict or like brewing anger, my immediate impulse is to like make a joke to like try and like ease the tension. So I 100% understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I'm the same way. Like probably not a good thing to do, but I also don't want to be like, I like you were saying, like trauma, quote unquote. Like I don't want to be the person going around complaining about how traumatized I am. You know what I mean? Like
exactly. And it's like I think there are other worse ways to like raise your kids. Like I think
totally.
Like my parents were still very supportive of my career. They were very like, but both of them like put me in art school, like from our private art classes when I was a little kid.
That's awesome.
They had no problems when I went to college. If I wanted a Spawn book, they said okay. Like they would only lose their tempers when it was like, you were doing what? Like you were like drinking, like with your friend, like stuff that it's like, yeah, well, I should not have been doing that,
Yeah.
I remember in college, I was the only Hispanic in, I think, on my floor, and my two roommates, very American. And I was just like nonchalantly like, yeah, man, I got caught drinking with like or me and my brother got caught drinking or something, and my mom like smacked us, and like she lost her shit, and like we thought it was funny, and like, you know, just shit happens. And my roommates were like, "Wait a minute, your mom hit you with like with a sandal, like the chancla, like, dude, that's wrong." And I'm like, "Whoa, like, what do you mean?" I'm like, "Dude, like, you know, I'm like, like everybody was Catholic where I grew up. I'm like, you know, this is just pretty. I hate to say it, but it was pretty normalized.
Yeah,
you know, growing up.
We got the wooden spoon when we were acting up.
Yeah, no, I didn't get that. Seems more painful.
I don't know. You have images of the belt, and I would imagine the belt's pretty bad.
A wooden spoon's like, it's hard. It's like, you know, it doesn't flap. I'm like imagining how much worse that is.
No.
But yeah, it's like, you know, we do, like, I deal with it by like laughing, and sometimes like people are like, well, like that's some people that did go through that, like they're traumatized by it, and like you're not. I'm like, how do you why do you process it that way? And again, I think it's just a way of like survive. I don't know if it's surviving or just, you know, like we use humor, man, and like again, it goes back to being cartoonist. Like we just process life and things differently because of our tendency to want to look at comics for escapism, and some comics are hilarious, some comics are funny, and it's just the way we process stuff, you know. I don't know, it's just something that I think about, because I have met other people here that like who have gone through very traumatic abuse, and they're very scarred by it, but it's like, well, I don't feel like I was scarred. Like my parents are still very loving. My parents feel very supportive. And then like to me, abuse that's more traumatic would be like neglectful parenting, or, you know, drinking and like not making dinner, like, you know, like me, that's much more like abuse, right?
There was nothing like sadistic about it, you know what I mean? Like there's I mean, I agree with you, it's probably not great, but it's like it's not the same thing as like you're saying, like clearly from an evil place abusing a child, like there's a quite a difference. But I also understand people being like, what the fuck, that's how you grew up? Like I've also gotten similar reactions of just like horror. It's like I don't know, I turned out all right as far as I know.
Well, we both make comics, so
the other thing I really, really resonated with and appreciated was kind of goofing around with coworkers to like make the best of a shitty job that you're like not wanting as a teenager, and like having someone at work who you like hanging out with was great. Like that just it took me back to being, you know, 16 years old, working at a pharmacy in my town and meeting a bunch of friends. I met a lot. You make a lot of friends that way when you're young, I think. At least I did in my like day jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing too, though. It's like I wasn't always working with people I got along with, because sometimes you would work with people you don't want to be with.
Yeah, that also happens. Yeah, that sucks.
And then if their family, like, you know, they can't fire you know, your cousin who was hired, like, because they're doing a favor to an act, like they, you know, and if you don't get along with them, it just makes it so much worse, and you have to learn how to tolerate each other, right? It's navigating people. It's learning how to navigate around like problematic people too, right? Like it's just trying to be patient and understanding, but also like, yo, am I being exploited by being here? Like, you know, like, is this exploitation? Oh man, as much fun as I had working there, like, sometimes there were days where I was like, we'd be at each other's throats, you know, like, you fucked up an order, and it's like, no, I didn't, like, I wrote it correctly. Why am I getting blamed? You need to make this plate because the customer's yelling at me.
I can only imagine the like, because your family, the like the extra level of like comfortability of like being like that fuck you energy.
Oh yeah, like, you know each other, you can tell each other off, you know. And then you get home like after the workday, and like you're all sitting at dinner, and like you have to let that anger go and just be like, all right, man, I'm sorry. Like, you know, it's like, we're both working tomorrow again, like at the same pace. You know,
that's awesome.
Yeah,
man. I just keep thinking to your father letting basically a music scene develop, and that's just so cool. I love here in New York. You know, I've put together a lot of video shows over the years, and I try and have that sort of DIY feel. It's always much more fun. It's always it feels like there's more of a community when it's like you're just kind of scraping by and figuring it out. We had to move to a real venue because the wood shop we were at, they've just gotten like very busy and they can't do the shows as often. So we had to like take some time off and find a real venue. And like I'm excited about it because it's like such a huge upgrade, and like the projector and the sound system, and like it's going to be like a real show now, and that's exciting. But on the one hand, I'm like, man, I liked that we were in a wood shop and like everything was a little bit shitty. Like I like that vibe.
Yeah, those shows can be a little more intimate, but you know, the space is good. It just means more people can come.
It's true. It's true. Well, this was really great talking to you. I really enjoyed Blazing Quantum. Everybody should grab a copy. It's a hell of a deal. You know, it's a great price for 64 pages. I read it over multiple sittings, so there's a lot in there to digest and enjoy. I'm excited to check out your Luchador one as well. That looks super cool. Just the character design alone is sucked me in.
These are also at
sweet.
Forbidden Planet.
Oh yeah.
Codex of the Jaguar, written by Mario Martinez. It's my first time working with a writer.
Oh, cool.
The script, so you know
that's awesome. I've yet to brave bringing in another element yet. Well, I'm building up to it.
Well, you know what? When I bought this one, because they were like, you know, I was looking through when I bought it. I'm like, oh, this looks like it's 8 different people drawing it. And like when I picked it up off the shelf, I'm like, oh, table of contents, different cartoonist. I'm like, awesome. And when I finished it, I'm like, wait, is this all the same dude? Like,
yeah,
it's pretty impressive.
Oh, thank you.
Guys, come across it, orange flavor. I really recommend you pick it up. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's true. I've never like actively settled on a style, so I end up kind of experimenting around. Like there's like through lines, I'm sure, through everything I draw that you might be able to pick up on. But yeah, it's something I think about a lot. Like
the anime style too, and I'm like, oh, it's totally a different, totally a different cartoonist.
No, so it's like, just me being totally a weirdo, a chameleon, I guess. Well, thank you. That I'm flattered you grabbed a copy. Where should people go to check out your stuff?
My Instagram handle is at Keops Ibañez. That's Keops Ibañez, like the guitar, Ibanez. And then you know, better comic shops that are out there. New York City comic shops. You can check out Forbidden Planet in New York City. I think JHU had some copies a while ago. I don't know if they still have them. And if you're not in the New York City area, Chicago Comics has bought my stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Comics Experience bought my stuff a while ago. I don't know if they still have them up. But I just got to plug the shops that do support independent creators. So if you guys are in those areas, even if they don't have my stuff, you should all check it out for sure.
Sweet. Well, it was great meeting you. And now that I know you're close by, we should grab a coffee sometime.
Yeah, definitely, man. Definitely.
It was great meeting you. Have a great night.
Likewise, man. Awesome.
Peace.